Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And Jazakallah so much for staying with us here on Hilaal Live. I'd like to say Jazakallah to my colleague Luqman Shadrack for taking us for that first 1 hour. Now we start off in one of the big political stories happening this week, and 7 political parties will meet next month for a historic national convention to discuss how they can work together to unseat the ANC in next year's national elections. The more established opposition parties, the Democratic Alliance, Inkatha Freedom Party, Freedom Front Plus and the National Freedom Party will be meeting with political newcomers ActionSA and the United Independent Party and the Spectrum National to chart a way forward. Joining us now from ActionSA is the party's Eastern Cape chairperson and one of the organizers of the Moonshot Pact, Athol Trollip. Mr. Trollip, good evening and thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, Fahraaz. Thanks very much for having me in your show, and good evening to your listeners.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Mr. Trollip, let's talk about this Moonshot Pact because it has been in the making for quite a few months, and we have reached that point where it will about to happen.
Yeah, for us, look, I mean, it's an innovation. It's a new thing in South Africa. Its conceptualization, I suppose, has been around for a while. But John Steenhuisen from the Democratic Alliance made an announcement at the end of their National Congress where he invited a number of political parties. In fact, I think he invited most of the opposition parties to attend this Moonshot Pact. There was a lot of speculation about what a Moonshot Pact actually is. And it's a long shot initiative. It was used in the United States about putting a man on the moon. And there's been about 7 meetings between the 7 political parties that you mentioned, including the ACDP and BOSA, who have been there in a observing capacity. And it's been interesting, bringing disparate parties together. The one thing that does unite us is that we believe that a future government under the ANC or an ANC coalition with other like-minded parties would be the final straw that breaks South Africa's back, and we believe that we need to do something different. So I think the biggest issue about putting this pact together is to make sure that we can get enough political parties that agree on our values and what kind of government we want to run, which must be a clean, ethical government, and that puts South African first and delivers service to the people and eschews corruption and all of those kind of things. But the most important thing is to make sure that we can put an alternative government together. So we need to convince enough political parties to join this pact and the conference that we're going to be having, the convention which we'll be having in August, to come together to start talking about what will happen after the election when we can muster enough votes to put an alternative government together. I think that has got to be the objective. If that doesn't materialize, what it'll end up being is just a group of people who are anti-ANC, and that's not going to take anybody anywhere. Mm-hmm. We've seen in South Africa we need to be about much more than being against the ANC. You need to offer an alternative view, a realistic view, and then go out and get enough votes to make that happen.
Yeah, I was going to come to that question, Mr. Trollip, because does the Moonshot Pact just necessarily mean, okay, we're just going to unseat the ANC, because that may be one objective, but what about the other objective going forward in terms of, assisting the citizens of South Africa who have been through a lot over the last few years in trying to make sure that the country is put onto the right track?
Okay, first of all, so I think what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to find a name for this pact that is easily, understandable and that South Africans can identify with. It's got to be a South African kind of flavor, so that will be a challenge for us to come up with a solution to that at our conference. But it's not enough to simply say we're going to replace the ANC. Any self-respecting political party contests an election to replace the government, and the art of politics is to convince people to change their minds. But I think South Africans are at idem now that we have to do things about corruption, we have to deal with unemployment, we have to improve our education, we have to make sure we can keep the lights on and attract foreign direct investment. At the moment, people don't want to invest in South Africa because there's no security of energy, there's no security of water, and criminality has gone completely off the charts. So those would be the challenges, just a few of them, that a new government would have to deal with. So what we will have to talk about at this convention is what kind of government will we offer South Africans after the election, because each party will go into the election, contest the election under their own banners and their own identity. But we would make a commitment that once the votes are counted and we can get enough votes together, we would have to put an offer to South Africans. It would have to be a manifesto that parties commit themselves to say, this is the kind of government that we're going to run. One of the values, for example, in ActionSA is that we believe that ethical leadership is non-negotiable. And I believe that in any new government, there would have to be a firm commitment to ethical leadership, which means that if one of your colleagues is doing something unethical or corrupt, that you do not have the luxury of turning a blind eye to shield your colleague. You must actually act and be ethical. So these are the kind of things that we would have to discuss at the convention. And the convention is going to be a tough discussion over a couple of days in Kempton Park at Empress Paris, where CODESA was held. And during the CODESA period, people negotiated right through the night for days on end, weeks on end, to try and find some common ground upon which we could build a new South Africa. We're going through another phase now where we're going to be debating through the night and through the days to try and find common consensus on what it is that makes South Africans really good. For example, Fahraaz, if you look at some couple of sporting metaphors, if I may use them, in the World Cup football that we hosted in 2010, or the 1995 World Cup rugby victory and the last one, South Africans are really good when they're coming together and they are standing shoulder to shoulder, black and white, young and old, or united around common purpose. And I think we as politicians could use this convention and this time of discussion with different political parties to start finding some consensus where we can say we're comfortable to stand shoulder to shoulder with other political parties to deal with the issues that affect South Africans on a day-to-day basis. So I think it's a really interesting period that we're going to go through, but it's going to require some serious kind of political leadership and maturity where political parties must stop pointing fingers at each other and starting to point in a direction that South Africans will feel comfortable in going in.
Mr. Trollip, at the moment it stands as 7 political parties, including ActionSA. Is there room for others to join this Moonshot Pact?
Well, we in ActionSA believe that the invitation should be open to all political parties to come and join this Moonshot Pact, because the more parties that we can bring together to start discussing, to find common ground and commonality and issues that we can agree on, yes, there will be issues that we don't agree on, the better. But here's the really important point that all political parties need to understand, and they need to start really reflecting on how they're going to deal with that. There are about 23 to 25 million South Africans that are eligible to vote that don't vote. And they didn't vote in the last election. 53% of voters that were eligible to vote and registered did not vote. So we can have a new government in 2024 if those people are motivated to come to the polls to vote for something that they believe will fix South Africa and that they believe will bring about change. So we need to start realizing that this is a reality, that this pact could lead to a new government for South Africa and start a brand new chapter. And that surely is exciting for us as a political party. ActionSA, we're very excited to be part of this initiative. But we also realize that we need to offer South Africans more than simply saying we want to get rid of the ANC. We want to get rid of the ANC because they've let us down, but we want to go and work together as South African political parties to fix the seminal challenges that really affect South Africans, like unemployment, for example, record unemployment levels. Imagine being part of the youth that are faced with 70% unemployment. You go and study, you go to school, you get good grades, you go to university, your parents send you to university with massive sacrifices, and you get a degree and you go and sit at home with your parents or your grandparents. It's simply not acceptable and it's not sustainable, and we need to fix that.
Mr. Trollip, just one final question before we wrap this conversation up. Leadership structure. I just want to know if, obviously, this Moonshot Pact is successful. What happens with regards to these parties involved in the Moonshot Pact, and how there's going to be structures in terms of cabinet, who becomes a minister here, who becomes a minister there. But most importantly, is this very similar to a coalition? Now, I ask this because we have seen coalitions not really being that successful in some of the metros. So maybe if you can break it down for, the viewer who is a layman, with regards to maybe not knowing much about politics as to whether the Moonshot Pact is some sort of a coalition, and if it is, how are you going to make sure that this pact is not like the coalitions we've seen in the metros, which have been a bit unstable?
No, that's an excellent question, Fahraaz. Thanks very much. Look, first of all, I think coalitions are new in South Africa, so political parties are still trialing them, and we're still working out who we can work with and who we can trust and where there are commonalities. So I think we are in a process. We're developing, we're maturing. Local government hasn't always been that successful, but there have been some very successful coalitions. And the problem at local government level for us is that there are many political parties. So you would get to a council where you might have 5 or 6 parties with one seat. And the coalition discussion then is about who's going to get a seat and who's going to be the mayor or the deputy mayor. And it becomes horse trading, and people hang out golden carrots, and whoever takes the carrot gets given the seat. Now, we believe at a national level it cannot be like that. Obviously, there will be less political parties, and part of the discussions at the convention would be, what are we going to do after the election? How will we identify the best person for the job? For example, who will be the president? Is it the person that comes from the party with the most votes? No, we don't believe that that's going to be the case. It's going to be the person that the people in the participating parties believe will take South Africa forward and be the best candidate for the job. For example, when it comes to policing and crime, who has got the individual with the best expertise and knowledge of how to deal with crime and policing? And this discussion at this convention pact meeting is going to be focusing very heavily on how we would put a government together. For example, one of the big issues that many of the political parties agree with is that there are way too many ministries in the current administration. So the very first thing we would have to be debating is reducing the number of ministries to what number? Will there be deputy ministers? And we believe there shouldn't be deputy ministers, because that just causes confusion and it dissipates the responsibility. So we believe it's going to be something completely different for us. One, there are less parties involved. There won't be any parties, or there shouldn't be any parties with one seat representatives, which makes them very susceptible to horse trading. And we will put together a memorandum of understanding about how we will establish a government. And it won't be after the event to see if you can get one more seat to take over a municipality, because that's where the instability comes. One person offers one party a position, they accept it, and then 2 weeks later they get given another position and they accept it and jump ship and go to the other coalition. So I think we as South Africans have learned a lot about coalitions. And the interesting thing is, at this convention, we are going to invite people from abroad and wherever they come from that have got the expertise and the experience of bringing coalitions together that are effective and that have worked in the past. We're not going to be shooting in the dark here. We are going to bring people with the expertise to advise us on how to compile a coalition government that will work and stay intact.
Mr. Trollip, we have to end it there. We say thank you so much for joining us here on Hilaal Live.
Thank you very much for having me on your show.
That's Mr. Athol Trollip. He is the ActionSA Eastern Cape chairperson and one of the organizers of the Moonshot Pact. Interesting to see how it will happen. Of course, that Moonshot Pact convention will be happening next month at Kempton Park. After the break, I will be chatting to David Mukhoshwa. He is the Swallows FC chairperson on the hiring of Steve Kompela. Do stay tuned.